Aware that this match could end up being Kurt's last one, I wanted to give him the best send-off I could. He told me he'd been unable to do much to get ready and trusted me to take care of him out there. It was a big night for me with Stu, Helen, Bruce, Julie, of course that was Bret's wife at the time, and my kids all in the audience. Kurt had put on somewhat of a little bit of weight because he'd not worked in the past 2 months and his back was tight. Often during the match we'd wind up he'd wind up with jarring spasms in his back as well. So this sounds like an absolute nightmare to go into a match with Matt for poor old Kurt Hennig here at this point, and the fact that he couldn't really do a lot for 2 months and all the rest of it. It sounds like this isn't quite what you want, but again, Bret being the professional, and even Kurt to a certain extent, they're gonna, obviously work this out somehow. Bret goes on and says, I made myself as humanly light as possible to help Kurt during the match, who gave all he had. I could actually see him moan through the match sometimes because of the way he was landing. If there was ever chemistry between two wrestlers, there was none better than that between me and Kurt, who instead that night that I kick out of the finish of who would let me do it for the first time of the Perfect Plex. Now, the Perfect Plex, Matt, I'm sure you remember that move, the Perfect Plex. When Kurt Hennig done it, it was slightly different because the Perfect Plex meant that was his finisher, and that pretty much done the business. Big deal, Matt, to kick out of that for the first time, and the fact that Kurt let him do that, I suppose. I remember that quite fondly in the match. I was like, Christ, no one's done that before. How have they done that? Which I guess is quite a big thing. Was that a big thing to you at the time, Matt? When you look back on that match?
Yeah, it definitely was. I mean, when you think of a move as that well protected, when you see it, you think automatically, no, that match is over. To see someone kick out of it, you just don't expect it. And then when you've seen it, you're like, wow, this guy has got some resilience. He really wants to win this match.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, Bret would go on and say, and this is just talking about the match here, that after that, going into the finish, when I was on the mat selling, Perfect pulled me to the middle of the ring, parted my legs and dropped his legs across my groin. Then he rolled me backward smartly to his feet, parted my legs and went for it again. But as his leg dropped across my stomach, I wrapped it around mine, hooking him into the sharpshooter from my back. I twisted to my stomach and pushed myself up to the standing position with the crowd right behind me, at this point chanting, "Let's go, Bret," before I could even hold the pose long enough for the Perfect to submit properly. Hebner rang the bell. In the aftermath, it was Kurt's idea that I should rip his blue singlet off and wear it over my shoulder like a battle trophy. I kissed the Intercontinental belt before I held it up over my head and, of course, paraded it around all four corners, standing on the second rope with a standing ovation. Man, it was quite a big night. I mean, I literally went back on this just before we came on tonight, and of course Stu was in the audience. His dad, his mum, his whole family are there, and how significant would this be? I mean, especially Madison Square Garden. I guess this, Bret had quite, if you go along further down his career, some big moments at Madison Square Garden. But this, obviously, some redemption here from not being booked at one time to now, getting this match. And, the other tremendous thing here is that night at SummerSlam, well, guess what got voted the best match of the night, Matt, on the Wrestling Observer by an absolute million miles here, was, of course, the third match of the night, Bret Hart versus Mr. Perfect, that, of course, everybody was worried about. And this match, contrary to the rumours, went over 18 minutes. So these guys done a tremendous job here, Matt, to put this on regardless of the injury here. How good is that match for you, Matt, when you go back?
Oh yeah, an excellent match, and as much as we talk about Bret Hart, it's an incredible testament to just how professional Mr. Perfect was. To go in there with those kind of problems and still put on a match of that quality, it's pretty amazing. And for Bret Hart himself, the stars really did align that night. He had the perfect venue, he had the perfect opponent, and even though I suppose the heavyweight title is the goal at the end of the day, but getting the IC title, that sets you right on the path, and I think it is the perfect title for him at that time, because he was such a workhorse. To carry that title and bring it to other opponents and just put on other matches of that quality is just incredible at that time. I think no one else could have carried it as well as them two men at that time.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm glad Meltzer put this in his notes here, just reading this, because I watched this before we come on, and I did notice this. Meltzer writes, after the match, Lord Alfred Hayes, of course we all remember him, don't we, Matt? Good old fellow countryman, interviewed Stu Hart and pulled the mic from him before he could complete a sentence. And I noticed that. I thought, well, that was good. Asked him the question and then pulls it away. That's brilliant, that. Really good interview techniques there from Lord Alfred Hayes, no doubt about that. Always had a very weird way of conducting interviews and commentary, that guy. Now, funny enough, after this, Matt, guess who takes Mr. Perfect's place whilst he's sidelined? Yep, none other than Warlord will be taking Mr. Perfect's place in the IC title matches against Bret Hart over the house shows. I bet that cheered him up to no end. Yeah. Those couldn't, you come out of Mr. Perfect and then you get Warlord. It's just such a complete different turnaround, isn't it? Fun fact here, folks, as well. Most of the talk of the past week continues to be about the suspension and the future of the Ultimate Warrior. Of course, this is the match, Matt, where you'll remember he pretty much held Vince McMahon to ransom, that he wasn't going to go out that night unless he got paid X amount of dollars and all the rest of it in that tag team match. And of course, they all got through it, and then of course Vince pretty much, it wasn't just a suspension, he kind of said he fired him after. I don't know if you remember that, Matt, but that was that night at SummerSlam, of course, that happened.
Yes.
And
I definitely remember that. Yeah. I remember, so many different interviews, especially with Hogan. He was like, I said I'd work him over if you want me.
Yeah, we can do this old school. We can beat him up in the locker room. Yeah, I remember that. And then only for him to go back on all that, of course. Well, it wasn't quite his fault. I would have done the same. It's, yeah. You know how they go. But yeah, Ultimate Warrior, I mean, I guess at this point, Matt, I would say it was pretty much getting to his head about just how big of a star he was, and how big he thought he was to the company. And obviously Vince McMahon, the one thing with him is that no one is bigger than the WWF. And I guess in a lot of ways it was definitely one of the most unprofessional things for a guy of that level to go out before the night and sort of demand that sort of kind of just a sort of huge increase in pay before the night goes on. And of course Vince himself will always say he has to deliver for the audience, so he's going to pay him. But after that was done, he was gone. I guess, mate, you can't really argue with that sort of way the Vince handled that.
No, I mean, very professional Vince. Like I said, and you can say what you want about him, but he knows how to book a show, and he knows, just what the fans want and what they need more than what they want. So yeah, giving him the match, perfect decision. And to fire him afterwards, it's only what Warrior deserved at the time. I mean, you don't learn no lessons if you're gonna act like that and just continue to expect. I mean, you couldn't just go around and keep doing that night after night. So a lesson had to be learned.
Yeah, no, totally. That's literally how that went about. I mean, it's, you just don't know what the hell he was thinking, really. For all that, like you kind of think about it and you think, like, how did that, how does that how did that work? In a lot of ways, but. For Warrior, like, what did he kind of think was going to come out of this? And then did he think, he was going to be able to do that again and again? It would have been crazy, wouldn't it? But, another fun fact here as well is that Ric Flair officially signed Thursday with Titan Sports. Flair will no longer be using the Nature Boy nickname, and instead his gimmick will be the Champ. Original, isn't it? The contract, believed to be a 2-year deal, had no financial guarantees other than the standard guarantees of income from television appearances. This is the point. This is quite a big deal in a lot of ways, that Ric Flair would jump ship to the WWF. He'd had a big sort of falling out from the WCW, the guys that were running it at the time. And the whole idea, I believe here, Matt, was that WrestleMania 8, they were, even at this point, and this just goes to show how long-term booking was, but the plan literally was here, Matt, that when Ric Flair came over, that they would somehow build that up towards Ric Flair versus Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 8. I'm pretty sure that match was always penciled in from the get-go. That's how that was going to work. And of course, the whole thing with him bringing in the WCW title with him as well, and claiming he was the real world champion and all the rest of it, I think that's what Vince was going for. But interesting, Matt, wasn't it, that they managed to pull that off and get Ric Flair over, because of course Ric Flair was the WCW guy, and Hulk Hogan was always known as the WWF guy, and styles wise very, very different, but just that whole thing about Ric Flair coming in as the heel, it almost seemed like the perfect match, the sort of fantasy match, was almost becoming ahead here, and the only time and only place it could happen would have to be WrestleMania. For you, Matt, was that a big deal for you? And when you look back on it, how big of a deal would that match have been if it had happened at that time?
Oh, a tremendously big deal. Just the way that they even introduced Ric Flair, that he would go through the Royal Rumble and, just outlast, 30 guys, or him being one of them, and then just come out of that with the heavyweight title, completely changing the game. And then you think, there's only one place this can go. Have two huge stars, battle each other. I mean, I'm sure that's what everyone was thinking at the time, because you don't just go all out and just sign, like Ric Flair from, who's synonymous with WCW, at the time, and they're the guy. I mean, if you talk about the Monday Night Wars and all that, this was before that, but it's kind of like the first shot that was fired.
Yeah, definitely was. Also Meltzer reports around the same time that Kurt Hennig is now expected to be out of action for at least 1 year because of his back injuries. Don't expect any references to Mr. Perfect on television during his absence. So, that injury obviously really did take its toll on poor old Kurt Hennig at that time. Now, we're up to the back end of September here, 1991, and another little fun fact here, but to do with the Harts. The younger brother, Owen Hart, of course, he wrestled in Stampede. And fun fact is that Owen Hart will be wrestling in Germany and Austria over the coming months and all the way up towards December, while along with up against the opponent of Chris Benoit at the time, Matt. So there you go. That's what was going on back then. You had these two very young, I guess, kids almost in wrestling terms going at it across Europe in Germany and Austria, and that was what was going on for those two. So definitely interesting times. And Bret Hart versus Warlord for the Intercontinental title is now on the house show circuits. The match has been reported as being very very strange and tough to watch at times. So you can only imagine what that was like for Bret. Another